Okay, welcome to number 2 in our online lecture series that I'm still referring to as Awkward Video Lectures with Professor Reed. This time we are coming to you from my living room, which is also in a state of significant disorganization because my husband and I were getting ready to move to a different house, which is now postponed indefinitely due to this delightful situation that the whole world finds itself in. So, again, you only get to see a small portion of this. Small chance that my husband could walk in and interrupt our lecture, but we're taking risks today. I just wanted to be in a room with a little more natural light. So here we are. I'm here in a cardigan, trying to make it look like I'm not in my pajamas, but I am in my pajamas because that's how we're all living right now. I want to get a little bit more into both The Haunting of Hill House and Carmilla today. I'm going to try to put a note in the description of the video that will tell you what time marking you want to skip forward to if you are reading Carmilla, so you can skip over the Haunting of Hill House stuff, although, it can still be educational to listen to, as these two texts both share a lot of really similar themes. So I want to start just talking a little bit about The Haunting of Hill House, and I'm just going to talk about what has happened up to page 50, as that's kind of loosely where our recommended reading guide says you might be, but I know that you're all reading at your own pace. So feel free to skip around in the video based on what you have actually read and what you're ready to listen to. Something I want to talk about a lot really is just kind of what we learn about Eleanor in the beginning of this book, because up to page 50 is really when she's just arriving at Hill House. So much of what has happened in these pages is all very, very internal as Eleanor kind of takes her little journey through the countryside to get to Hill House. There's a lot of characterization that happens here, though. So Eleanor, also known as Nell throughout the book, we know right off the bat that she seems to be expected to be kind of a meek person, right? She's having this argument with her sister about whether or not she can take the car, and it seems like people expect her to really submit to other people's points of view very easily. So it seems to be a big act of bravery for her to even take this car and venture out on her own as she does. There's a lot that happens in her journey that is really just her by herself, but revealing so much about her inner character to all of us. So some things that I noticed upon rereading this again as I am right now, so that I can kind of keep up with your experience of reading The Haunting of Hill House. Just so many instances of Nell really longing for a different type of life, right? There are many times when she's looking at a house that she sees along the way, and it says that she imagines a whole different life there. She talks about this old house that has shuttered windows and 2 stone lions in front. She imagines herself dusting the lions every day. We see how easy it is for her to kind of jump into an imagined life because she's clearly not happy with the life that she has. And I think this is a really important thing to notice about this character, that going into this story, into whatever is going to happen to her, we know that she's unhappy. She doesn't like where she's at. She seems resentful of the life that she has with her sister, of sharing things that way and not really having her own life. There's a moment when she stops for lunch at this restaurant, and she's seated over this stream. She's on a balcony. It sounds like a really nice lunch, honestly. And she talks a little bit about, or doesn't talk about, excuse me, we're in her point of view, so the writing shows us that she is seated near this table where there is a little girl who's refusing to drink her milk because she doesn't have what her mother calls her cup of stars, right, which is her teacup that she drinks out of at home that has stars in the bottom. And Nell thinks to herself, insist on your cup of stars. The world will try to take away from you what you want, and you should insist on what you want. And feels happy for this little girl when she doesn't drink out of the normal cup and sort of rebels against her parents. This is a moment that tells us so much about Nell, right? Because she so urgently wants this young girl to stand up for herself. It tells us that Nell isn't someone who stood up for herself, right? That she regrets that about herself. Also, some really interesting stuff plays out as she arrives at the house. And some of my favorite moments in the book, while I was rereading this, I kept stopping and quoting things to my husband, which, I'm sure is super fun for him. Parts that I find really, really funny. If you've watched any adaptations of The Haunting of Hill House, you might know that there's not a lot of humor in the movie adaptations, at least not the ones that I have seen. There's an adaptation from, I believe, the early 2000s called The Haunting, which is comically bad and really not faithful to the book, but it's very, very serious. There's also the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House, which has almost absolutely nothing to do with the novel at all. I can't stress that enough. If you are watching The Haunting of Hill House on the Netflix series as a way of getting the plot of this novel, you're not going to get it at all, because it has nothing to do with the novel. It has some of the same character names, but absolutely nothing else is the same. So don't do that as a way to get the plot. You'd be better off with Cliff's Notes. But they do take inspiration from The Haunting of Hill House, right? And there's very, very little humor transferred from the text into that adaptation. But there's a lot of dark humor in The Haunting of Hill House, and I don't think that we talk about it enough when we talk about it in the scope of other works of horror and how much it's really influenced the genre. So one of my favorite parts is when Nell first arrives at the house and is talking to the caretaker, Mrs. Dudley, and Mrs. Dudley just keeps saying things like, "No one will be able to hear you at night in the dark." And then when Theo appears, the next person who is participating in Dr. Montague's study, and it's just Nell and Theo, and we have again Mrs. Dudley taking Theo to her room and showing her, and she repeats basically the same creepy speech that she gave to Nell, right? "No one will come for you in the dark. I'm not here at night. I set dinner out at this time, blah, blah, blah." And the two women are Nell and Theo just kind of having a conversation, and Mrs. Dudley is in the corner, like, saying creepy things over them. I find this hilarious. It makes me laugh so hard. And it is supposed to be funny, too. It is supposed to be weird and creepy. It's supposed to be making fun of this old woman who is just, like, really, really stuck in this dark and creepy frame of mind and completely ignorant of the fun conversation these two younger women are having. So don't let these little moments of levity and humor slide past you, because they definitely are there in the novel. And I think that they work well as kind of a counterbalance to all of the really, really dark Gothic stuff going on. Which we should talk about too, right? There's a lot of very common themes of Gothic literature really present in The Haunting of Hill House, especially during Nell's drive to Hill House. There's a lot of remarking upon the countryside. Nature in general is a really big part of Gothic literature. So when we have a lot of the character talking about the natural scenery, that's part of the Gothic genre. But also her talking about the town of Hillsdale, right? That's the little town that's right outside of Hill House, where the residents are supposedly like, they really don't like it. If you ask them about Hill House, they're touchy about it. But it's this dilapidated town that's falling apart. It doesn't look good. It's described as ugly. The woman who lives there, who works in the coffee shop that Nell stops at, seems absolutely shocked that she would remark upon it as anything at all other than a place that you might want to leave. And anything that is decaying and falling apart and in disrepair, that's a big Gothic literature theme as well. So pay attention to those themes, as they will continue to come out throughout The Haunting of Hill House. But those are some really big ones to pay attention to. Also, there is just like foreshadowing all over the place, right? As Nell pulls up to this house, she's thinking over and over again, like, I don't like this. I shouldn't be here. Lots of foreshadowing that something bad is going to happen, right? Something bad is coming this way. So, you know, I'm here to bring you your uplifting reading during this time. I'm hoping that it's a nice distraction. I always find things that are supernatural to be a nice distraction from things that are happening in the real world that are unpleasant, because I think of the supernatural things as things that don't happen in the real world. So they're a fun imaginary thing for us to investigate. I don't want to go too much further than that into talking about The Haunting of Hill House right now, because I will get beyond page 50. That's about where we're at once you get to page 50. It's Nell and Theo have arrived, and they're waiting for other people to arrive at the house and kind of see what's going on. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the beginning of Carmilla. Similarly to the way I've been talking about Hill House, I don't want to give too much plot away beyond the beginning. Lots of similar themes right off the bat, although a very different style here. So remember, if you're reading Carmilla, that it's a much older text. This is pre-Dracula. This is an older vampire story, but the language is really pretty simple for the time that it was published. So this is a way that it's kind of similar to Edgar Allan Poe's stories, where Poe is a writer who is from a time period where we often think of people writing in really kind of complex styles, things that people often say are difficult to read now, right? Because they don't write the way that contemporary writers write or the way that contemporary people speak. But the language is still really plain in most Edgar Allan Poe stories, which is why they're so accessible. Plain does not mean bad. Don't think that's what I mean. And I think the same can be said of Carmilla, that the text is relatively simple and straightforward, and it's written as if it were a diary entry, right, from our protagonist. And right away, we have a lot of emphasis on the countryside in Styria, where they are at a schloss, which is just a word for castle, right? I love all the emphasis on like how cheap it is for them to live there at the beginning. I'm like, God, making me jealous. I want to live in a schloss in a countryside, and it just be like, oh, it's so cheap and affordable. Anyway, we have right away a lot of emphasis on the narrator's loneliness, right? Which is something that this has in common with The Haunting of Hill House. It's really evident from the first 50 pages of The Haunting of Hill House that Nell feels really alone. And Laura, our protagonist here in Carmilla, also feels really alone. She talks about growing up with no one else around her really except for the servants who live with her and her father. And it starts off with her recalling this rather creepy tale from her childhood of remembering waking up to a beautiful figure crawling into bed with her and then feeling a puncture mark on her neck. What could it be? And then that figure crawls under the bed, and when her nurses, I believe, or servants, whoever are there to attend to her, as she is upper class and has people waiting on her all the time, they come in and kind of make fun of her for being anxious about it, but then they feel the bed and they say, there definitely was someone here. So right away, we know something is off here in this story, right? We know there's something supernatural coming. We've got all of this foreshadowing right away that this person has already experienced something otherworldly in their life, right? Then we get the news that a young lady who was supposed to come stay has died of a mysterious ailment. It seems like the person who was in charge of her care is very, very upset about this. So we have a whole lot of foreshadowing in the beginning of Carmilla that something bad is coming, right? Something otherworldly is coming. So these are ways in which these two texts are really similar. Very, very lonely protagonists who are really longing for companionship and will both really attach themselves to the other female characters who show up in their respective stories. So if you're reading only one or the other, as I know most of you are, I don't expect you to read both texts. I really don't. If you have spare time, you can read both, but I seriously don't expect you to. But I think it's worth listening to both sides of the video lecture because these texts both have so much in common. They're such rich texts in terms of Gothic themes, especially Carmilla. We also have a hint in the beginning of Carmilla where she talks a little bit about a nearby town that is deserted, that was once run by a family called the Karnsteins, who were powerful but have fallen out of power somehow. Just a little quick mention of this town and how dilapidated it is, and no one ever goes there anymore. This place is going to come back. This is intentional foreshadowing again, right? This is the author bringing this up so that we know about it, and it's kind of set up for us to experience later on when it becomes a significant part of the story. So later on, that deserted town that the Karnsteins ran is going to come back. So remember that later. Don't let it take you by surprise. But a lot is being set up here. Basically, at the beginning of Carmilla, we know that we have someone who is alone in this beautiful landscape, looking for companionship, but something otherworldly has already touched her life, and we have lots of bits of foreshadowing coming in telling us that it's not going to be an easy ride for this character. And also we know, if you read the little italics disclaimer before the book actually starts, this is not a realistic disclaimer. This is, again, part of the fiction, right? It is supposed to be that this story was taken from a doctor's record, somebody who was studying the supernatural, and that they saved these notes that Laura made. This was a common style of horror stories back in that time, where they would kind of frame it as if they were part of someone's research on supernatural things. This is just a way to make it a little scarier, feel a little more realistic for the audience. So if you read that part, just know that that's also part of the fiction. It's not like something that somebody actually gathered as part of supernatural research. That's part of the fiction as well, but that is also something that is giving us a sense of foreshadowing, right? Because right off the bat, we know that this is going to involve something supernatural, and also we know that the narrator of the story has since passed away since the story has been told. Now, we don't know how they've passed away. They could still be fine at the end of the story, but we know at the time that this fictional person who has gathered it for their casework into the supernatural, that this person is dead. So things to keep in mind as you're reading Carmilla. I'm excited for y'all to get into these texts, and I will post another video lecture next week diving into the details. Seems like we've made it for 15 minutes without my husband coming in and interrupting us, so that's good. Not even my dog barking at anything weird outside. So that's it for me for now. I will upload this video for all of you, and please let me know if you have questions or comments about anything. I have opened up discussion boards on both of these texts so that we can talk about it. You will get extra credit points for anything you post on the discussion board, so a little motivation for you to share your thoughts on this work, but also feel free to email me about questions regarding these texts or anything else having to do with the class or anything else. I'll try to help you with anything you need help with. So I hope all of you are hanging in there in quarantine, and I will see you next week.